Welcome to Module 2 of the MELI Unit's Program Learning course. In this module, we will introduce you to key definitions and foundational concepts important to learning, including an introduction to learning agendas and an overview of MELI's process for creating ECA's learning agenda. Let's get started. As we've discussed in previous modules, we generally distinguish between two different types of learning. The first is Big L learning, which is strategic, organization-wide learning that pulls data from a wide variety of sources to inform broad, cross-cutting, mission-related or operational questions. The second is Little L learning, which is using data to inform decision-making related to specific program activities. In this module, we'll discuss one tool that supports Big L strategic learning. This is a learning agenda. So what is a learning agenda? A learning agenda is a set of questions addressing knowledge gaps that, when answered, enable effective program decisions. Additionally, learning agendas include roadmaps for the planned activities intended to answer those questions. And finally, learning agendas set out strategic knowledge and information priorities to guide evidence gathering activities. So why is a learning agenda important? First of all, learning agendas are a requirement for federal agencies as set out in the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. More importantly, they enable us to gather information we need and turn that knowledge into action. Learning agendas also help us prioritize research and evaluation work. What does a learning agenda include? A learning agenda should contain several components, including questions and sub-questions, featuring a mix of short and long-term questions and a mix of mission-based and operational ones. A learning agenda should include an implementation plan that serves as a roadmap for answering those questions. This includes learning activities that the agency will undertake, the methods to be used, and the anticipated timing. OMB guidance suggests that learning agendas should also summarize challenges that may arise over the course of implementation and the potential strategies to mitigate them. And finally, learning agendas should include plans for sharing the learning identified over the course of implementation. Now let's look at MELI's process for creating ECA's learning agenda. Our process dates back to 2018 with the creation of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, which mandated that federal agencies create learning agendas. ECA went a step further and created its own bureau-level learning agenda. The MELI unit launched ECA's first learning agenda in 2019. Since the learning agenda is tied closely to our Bureau's strategic priorities, with the launch of ECA's revised Functional Bureau Strategy in April 2022, we also began the process of revising our learning agenda. Between April and October of 2022, we synthesized inputs from key stakeholders. This was a collaborative process, and we'll look at what it involved in just a moment. Finally, the MELI team launched ECA's new learning agenda in October of 2022. As previously mentioned, the MELI team synthesized input from a multitude of stakeholders when creating the learning agenda. To develop its Functional Bureau Strategy, or FBS, ECA uses a deliberative, inclusive process in which representatives from across the Bureau and across working levels come together to weigh in on ECA's strategic priorities. The MELI team helped facilitate this process and also used it as an opportunity to solicit input from the working group on the topics that they needed to learn more about in order to continue improving their programs. Next, we engaged our monitoring and evaluation community of practice. This was a group of M&E practitioners working in the public diplomacy space, many of whom are implementers of ECA programs. We asked for feedback on what parts of the 2019 learning agenda were most useful, what other types of information would be beneficial, and importantly, how to best share all of this information. We also had numerous conversations as a MELI team, reflecting on the work we did for the 2019 Learning Agenda and reviewing foreign policy priorities outlined in the Department Learning Agenda, ECA's FBS, and the Interim National Security Strategy. These conversations helped us identify questions that we wanted to keep or revise from the 2019 Learning Agenda, as well as identify new areas of interest. Then, it was time to synthesize all of the stakeholder feedback. We were very deliberative in the steps we took throughout the synthesis process. We not only reflected on stakeholder feedback following our initial conversations, we documented their inputs and went back to systematically review these inputs before drafting the Learning Agenda questions. Just as we would process qualitative data collected for an evaluation, we reviewed our written notes, affinity mapped or grouped inputs by topic and theme, and tallied votes anytime we asked our stakeholders to rank priorities. We were also careful to write down specific areas of interest and nuance related to our questions, even if these nuances didn't make it into the Learning Agenda questions themselves. Once we had created a draft of the Learning Agenda, we engaged the wider Bureau to provide input. First, we requested written feedback on the draft Learning Agenda questions, asking our colleagues to flag things that were missing, out of place, or unclear. We then finalized the Learning Agenda based on this feedback and began the process of socializing it within the Bureau. We presented the Learning Agenda at a monthly monitoring and evaluation seminar, and during the seminar, we collected feedback on which questions teams had evidence to contribute to, and which questions teams were interested in learning from. ECA's current Learning Agenda reflects the Bureau's research priorities for fiscal years 2022 through 2026. The Learning Agenda includes 8 questions, and each features detailed sub-questions. Of the 8 questions, 6 focus on programming, 2 focus on management, and 2 align with the department's Learning Agenda. The MELI team follows a cyclical process of generating evidence, sense-making, and sharing to implement the Learning Agenda. The first phase of this 3-part process is gathering evidence. Through learning activities such as evaluations, performance monitoring, desk research, and more, we gather data to inform project planning and implementation. MELI's approach to gathering evidence is unique in that we've built a process whereby we consistently document and compile evidence from our ongoing M&E work in alignment with the Learning Agenda questions, rather than relying only on standalone, separate research activities to answer those questions. Sense-making refers to the process of placing the data we've collected into the context of ECA programs. As part of Learning Agenda implementation, we pause and reflect on evidence when we are able to partially or fully answer one of our Learning Agenda questions. To better understand what exactly these data mean for ECA programs, the MELI team creates a summary brief or presentation to share preliminary learning with stakeholders, and we facilitate pause and reflect discussions to review the evidence, discuss how it affects our work, and identify actionable next steps. Sharing what has been learned is important as it extends the benefits to stakeholders who can also learn from the evidence you've collected. When available evidence allows, especially after pause and reflect sessions, the MELI team shares what we're learning with the Bureau, as well as our wider audience of implementing partners and other Department of State stakeholders, so that others have the chance to learn from our work too. This includes publishing summary briefs, presentations, and other resources on our website. Through our work developing ECA's Learning Agenda, we've identified 4 best practices to help others developing or implementing learning agendas. First, engage a range of stakeholders. This ensures you are not only strategic in identifying knowledge gaps and research needs, but also that you help to create a learning culture in which data are used to inform decision-making once collected. Second, set intentional, specific steps in your process. From gathering input to guiding implementation, being deliberate in our process has helped the MELI team be strategic about our work and also realistic about what we can accomplish. Next, find ways to integrate learning into existing processes. We incorporate our learning work into our existing monitoring and evaluation activities so that we are learning from all the evidence we are gathering. Finally, we developed tools, resources, and processes that are easy to use and integrate with our existing work. These resources help keep us organized and accountable, and they enable us to follow the steps we intentionally set out in pursuit of our learning priorities. That's all for our module on learning agendas. When you're ready, you can head back to the training overview and move on to Module 3 on sharing learning.